Imagine for a second waking up in a place like this. You can immediately tell that something is off. The harsh fluorescent lighting buzzes above your head. The sound of a dank carpet travels out from beneath your feet. You instinctively start moving around, searching for signs of other people. But the longer you walk, the less things make sense. It doesn't take long for you to realize that you are completely alone. But even that feeling starts to shift as you begin hearing unexplained sounds around you. Running does nothing more than waste your energy. Nobody is coming. Or so you think. If you are unfamiliar with the concept of liminal spaces, you don't have to look far across the internet to find out, especially in recent memory. While I'm sure the concept has been around for much longer, contributions around message boards and videos from Solar Sands, Kane Pixels, and many others have only further cemented its popularity over time. While further depictions of liminal spaces include some kind of entity or creature, I find that the more existential and quiet nature of them to be far more frightening. The difference between terror and horror is that horror is actually seeing the frightening thing, but terror occurs within our minds, and we are given the ability to project our darkest fears to try and answer the question of the unknown. We all understand the feeling of what it's like walking down a dark street or an empty hallway. The kind of feeling that puts us on edge, to be alert. The kind of feeling that somebody is watching us. There's an eeriness to it all, and a slight sense of danger, almost as if we're not meant to be there. This is what makes liminal spaces so effective. Liminality itself refers to the transitional or initial stage of a process. Throughout our own lives, we may experience this when moving houses, graduating from school, or starting a new job. But in architecture, liminal spaces are defined as the physical spaces between one destination and the next. So in a way, we aren't supposed to be there. At least, not in a sense of close inspection or conscious thought. As the concept has been remixed and altered further on the internet, I believe this definition has somewhat been changed, or at least broadened. If you look up pictures of liminal spaces on Google, you'll see a lot of similar images of empty buildings or long hallways. Sometimes it's hard to describe or explain what this means to somebody unfamiliar with the concept, and so I find the definition of canopsia, taken from the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, to be much more encompassing. The eerie, forlorn atmosphere of a place that's usually bustling with people, but is now abandoned and quiet. A school hallway in the evening, an unlit office on a weekend, vacant fairgrounds. An emotional afterimage that makes it seem not just empty, but hyper-empty, with the total population in the negative, who are so conspicuously absent they glow like neon signs. The backrooms themselves are the most popular example of liminal spaces, and the reason it is so unsettling is that it's an imitation of what we know as an empty office space. The fact that it is unorganized but containing human elements like walls, floors, and lights contradicts itself. The function of the space is called into question, and this is what I find so particularly fascinating about liminal spaces and how they can be depicted within art. It calls upon the artist to break the rules of design and encourages them to explore the potential of creating something unsettling, yet familiar. During my childhood, I watched an episode of the Rugrats called Toy Palace, where Tommy and Chucky get locked in a toy store overnight. The isolation, the strangeness of seeing an empty toy store. This is probably the first time I was exposed to the idea of liminal spaces, and while I didn't know it at the time, it made a strong impression on me because it forced me to confront what loneliness and isolation means. And this idea in the broader spectrum of art has been explored in various ways. Perhaps one of the most famous paintings in this genre is Nighthawks by Edward Hopper, though I find the same feeling present in many of his works. More notably, they capture the feeling of liminality in daylight, which is a theme we'll explore further in the video. Office in a Small City depicts a man sitting alone in a corner office, his sleeves rolled up and looking visibly tired or lost in thought. He is stuck inside a giant concrete building, surrounded by nothing but a bland grey wall, and this is also repeated in the distance. What I find so striking about this image is how Hopper has managed to make a city, which is commonly filled with life, feel so empty and lifeless. As the man is the only figure in the image, it positions us to feel as he does, isolated and alone. I believe this is what Edward Hopper is trying to communicate in this painting, and his own commentary on the nature of commercial work. In another example, Morning Sun captures much of that same feeling. The figure sitting on the bed is even facing the same direction, peering out into an empty city. The expression on her face is eerie, as if she was a mannequin and lifeless. We don't see much in the way of her eyes. Even the bedroom itself is devoid of any personality, any expression. It is simply there to fill the basic needs of the occupant. The darkness of the room around the figure likely consumes the rest of the apartment, except for the brief sunlight peering in. While the light is hitting the figure, I picture no comfort, no warmth. It just is. A common element in liminal spaces is the feeling of being in a dream, where our memories and perception are almost there, but not quite based in reality. We understand and see elements that form the daily makeup of our lives, signs, posts, areas that we've moved past, on our way to another destination. Liminal spaces seek to recontextualize them in a new way, where instead of being in the background, they are the subject matter. For as creepy and unsettling as liminal spaces can be, an unusual element of isolation is the sense of peacefulness that can be felt. When we are left to our own thoughts and step back from the constant engagement of daily life, we gain insight and mindfulness, and the artworks of Hiroshi Nagai encapsulate that well. While similar to Edward Hopper in that they depict isolation and emptiness during daylight, I find that Hiroshi Nagai's works are rather relaxing instead. His artworks, which are often used as album covers, have become fairly synonymous with the city pop movement of the late 1970s and 80s in Japan. Painted with the use of bright pastel colors and influences from sunshine pop, Hiroshi Nagai also seeks to capture the 1960s aesthetic from Southern California, often depicting idyllic and empty beachside views. Even still, I find that there is a timeless feeling in his works. Perhaps that is because Nagai has stated his influences also includes the works of René Magritte and Salvador Dali, whose surreal aesthetics are not necessarily placed in a given context, but that of a dreamscape. From the end of the Second World War until the late 1980s, Japan thrived through a state of economic prosperity, and as money began to flow through Japanese citizens, a new wealthy leisure class emerged. This newfound optimism led people to look towards a modern living standard of abundance and leisure. This is also reflected in Nagai's works, and in the painting Poolside, Yellow Towel, we see a deep blue sky accompanied by a swimming pool and a backyard. The bright colors are inviting, and the direction of the leaves indicate wind moving throughout the piece. The painting is made up of mostly flat lines and smooth forms, which adds to a sense of clarity and relaxation. The pool sparkles, water laps at its sides, and the sound of the ocean is communicated through the deep blue lines in the background. Though liminal in nature, it is peaceful too. As the vaporwave and city pop aesthetic continue to grow today, contemporary artists borrow elements from Nagai, who was himself adapting a bygone 1960s aesthetic. There's a certain sense of irony in the second resurgence of artworks within city pop. As Nagai puts it himself, as this style grows in popularity internationally, it is being imported back into Japan, and as an artist that has been associated with it from the beginning, I have been getting support from overseas fans on Twitter and Instagram. I find myself bemused but at the same time intrigued by the fact that, without meaning to, I can collaborate with creators who are 2 generations younger than myself. While many liminal spaces exist and end in one image, the works of Simon Stålenhag answers the question of how a narrative intersects with the concept. Many of Stålenhag's works showcases derelict and abandoned technology that has been reclaimed by nature, rotting in a remnant of the world past. The Electric State is one such story that explores life once humanity has given itself over to a robotic host. It follows the story of a teenage girl named Michelle and her robot as they embark on a cross-country mission. Due to the very nature of their quest, they pass by many liminal spaces in the literal sense. Roads, motels, car parks, gas stations. The darkened sky and fog adds layers of mystery beyond its hold, and Simon Stålenhag captures that eeriness very well. It's more of a dystopia than the works of Hiroshi Nagai, and more fantastical and science fiction than the cities of Edward Hopper. I find Stålenhag's works fascinating, showcasing a world consumed by technology, where towers of metal and steel stand tall, like monuments towards a new age. One of the most memorable paintings from the Electric State is this one. A man standing in an abandoned car park in the dead of night, his head attached to a communications device that leave him paralyzed and still. The intense fog punctuates the night sky, to the point where it's difficult separating the ground and horizon. The repeated light posts veer off into the void until they are consumed entirely. This oppressive atmosphere symbolizes the decline of humanity and how far removed society has become from their creation. Wanting to find out more about how artists have interacted with the concept of liminal spaces, I took to ArtStation to view what digital artists were creating today. During my search, I came across the works of Carredo and Jamie Williams, and enamored with their concepts, I reached out and asked them what liminal spaces meant to them.
When I look at liminal space images, I always think about what is beyond what's shown in the picture. Liminal spaces are like the uncanny valley of places. You always feel like there's something wrong or missing, but in a weird way, kind of gives me a sense of comfort at the same time. Liminal spaces also give me the feeling of nostalgia for a past that I haven't experienced for some reason, and it seems that I'm not alone in feeling this way.
For me, it's the sense of isolation and mystery. My favorite thing to do is to go for long walks in places where they're uncharacteristically empty. There's this implied secret world of unused spaces that feels surreal. People tend to think of liminal spaces as creepy, but for me, it's quite the opposite. I find the visuals to be comforting. It's a similar feeling to being at school at night when it's empty. Familiar, yet different. There's an emptiness, yet with implied life that exists outside from where you are.
Carredo's 3D renders are dreamlike and often showcase a swimming pool or water. He told me that a big influence on his work stems from architecture magazines he read at 7 years old, and to replicate the feeling of nostalgia for the past you didn't experience. The interplay between something feeling off but simultaneously comforting is the goal, and left for the viewer to interpret and decide for themselves. Carredo's work feels much more dreamlike from the layout of the environments and the use of pastel colors. The outside world beyond his renders are simplified in being a clear blue sky, which gives a feeling of being high up in the air, removed from any sense of civilization. Carredo told me that once discovering the liminal space community, as well as the subreddit, he gathered new inspiration from the artists on there, the most notable being Jared Pike, Luke Rack, and Hiroshi Nagai. Jamie Williams' work, taken from a series entitled Maze Sketches, depicts various imaginary landscapes and times of day. These illustrations, which are also liminal in nature, are depicted through graphic reduction. The abstraction of certain shapes and simplification of detail calls upon the viewer to actively participate in reading the images. What I particularly enjoy about Jamie's work is the way light interacts with the environment. As most of the paintings are lit by ambient light, this helps create a sense of atmosphere and like the viewer is always in shadow. There's a sense of voyeurism peering into the landscapes, where oftentimes, a small slice of light will carve out the focal point of the image, while the rest falls back into darkness or shadow. Jamie told me that he is inspired by the works of Arnold Böcklin and Aaron Wiesenfeld, who both captured the haunting atmosphere he wishes to convey in his own art. I find that the pandemic has been a factor in why liminal spaces have become so popular and gripped our attention. Isolation and loneliness have been very common during the past few years, and the cultural zeitgeist has shifted because of it. There is a yearning to go outside, for a sense of optimism, and to return to a sense of normalcy. I have no doubt that liminal spaces will continue being popular as they are rich in exploration. They deal with the duality of emotions, light and dark, and between confronting our fears and also feeling a sense of peace. It forces us to stare into the void and be alone, to think about our lives without people, and be transported somewhere new, either for an escape or to appreciate our surroundings even more. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. I certainly had a lot of fun putting this one together, and a big special thanks to the artists that so kindly allowed me to use their works and for the insight they provided as I was writing the script. Until next time everyone, take care and stay safe.